Okay, Bob has something really special to share. Really special.
This is the screenplay that John Wayne used when he filmed this movie, and you can tell that it's John Wayne's screenplay because, being a kind of a linear fellow, he would fold over each page after he finished shooting for the day. And so all the pages except the last few are folded over, and I'm often asked whether there's any handwriting on this. And John Wayne was not a terribly literate fellow either, so there's no writing, absolutely no writing on this one. I have the script that he used for The Searchers, and it has some doodles on it, and it has his name in his own kind of weird calligraphy, but he wasn't, when you get a Marlon Brando script, you get these long screeds about what is my motivation and what the character really did. There was none of that for John Wayne. He was a straight ahead guy, but if you want to come have a look at this on the way out, I'll keep it here. So.
When I ask you, Bob loves Western and knows them well, and so he's come a couple of times, and we did a Brando Western.
We did One-Eyed Jacks, and then we did Canyon Passage, right?
And when I said, what do you think of Rio Bravo? You just said, oh, that's the best of all time. And why?
Well, there's a lot of great things about this movie. There isn't an ounce of fat on the script. A lot of the great Westerns are messes because Sam Peckinpah was fighting with his producers or Michael Cimino and people like that. So there are a lot of Westerns where you have to imagine what they might have been without all the friction. This is a very seamlessly written, photographed, acted, and directed movie that is entirely a self-contained universe with no leakage anywhere. That's the first thing. I mean, the performances across the board are fantastic. And, I'm a big Dean Martin fan, and this is clearly his greatest screen role. I mean, he made a lot of really crappy movies like the Matt Helm movies and stuff like that, but this is a wonderful movie. And of course, the whole time you're thinking about the Waco Kid from Blazing Saddles, which is clearly based on this character. And it's particularly great because it's such a classical Western, even though it's very late for classical Westerns. By 1959, Anthony Mann and Bud Boetticher had already made their kind of existential Westerns with Jimmy Stewart as a very tortured, ambiguous character, and Randolph Scott in his later stages. I'm thinking also of The Gunfighter, and even Gary Cooper had already made Man of the West, in which he played a reformed criminal. And this movie in 1959, same year that The Left-Handed Gun came out, was kind of still very old school. I mean, it kept going because they remade this movie 2 more times with Robert Mitchum and I forget who else, but both of them are terrible compared to this. And it's a very good John Wayne performance, even though it's not his deepest. I mean, it's the most classical performance, and it's sandwiched in between The Searchers, which is his great Western performance of 56, and The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, which is 62, where you can see John Wayne kind of as the vestigial figure of the West who enables Jimmy Stewart. I mean, his performance here doesn't have the depth of those two because of all the comic relief, but it is kind of the John Wayne. And in fact, they used a clip from this when they did The Shootist, which is the last John Wayne Western and one of the best. So the fact that this movie was so classical at a time when revisionist Westerns were all the thing is one great thing. And it's also a beautifully and deftly directed auteur film. That's not a contradiction. It's clearly a Howard Hawks film. It's one of his greatest films. It has a lot of motifs from his other movies, like when Feathers says, "I'm not that hard to get." That's like a reference to Lauren Bacall and Jean Arthur in Only Angel Have Wings has a similar line, but it's not showy. I mean, Robin Wood, a great early film critic who called this one of the greatest films ever, he said, look, Citizen Kane is a great movie, and Orson Welles is a genius, and he never lets you forget it for a single frame. Rio Bravo is a movie where Howard Hawks' fingerprints are all over it, but he is not at all oppressive or intrusive. It's a very seamless movie. I did want to mention, one bit of trivia. When you see Ricky Nelson's older brother, David Nelson, who was also on Ozzie and Harriet, in the same year, he played a similar character in Day of the Outlaw, the Andre de Toth movie with Robert Ryan. So clearly, in the late 50s, they were sitting around saying, how do we tap into this youth market? So we're going to put Ricky Nelson in this movie, and over the other side of town, they're saying we're going to put David Nelson.
Yeah,
in
and
this.
television actors.
Right. So the one other thing I wanted to mention is that before I take questions is that this movie is often mentioned as a kind of an answer to High Noon, which brings in this whole political dimension, one of the less attractive aspects of John Wayne, because Hawks, and to a greater extent Wayne, were angry about High Noon, which I don't think is a particularly good film, but that's another discussion. But it was made by people who were all called in front of the House Un-American Committee and basically hounded out of America, Carl Foreman and those guys. And they didn't like the fact that the Western was being subverted, where everybody in the town was chicken, and the sheriff didn't really want to have a showdown, and he had to get help from his wife, although, we get a flower pot assist. She gets an assist in the stats for that. And I think it's kind of a made-up thing. I mean, yeah, maybe Hawks did say something about it, but I'm not sure that this is a particularly right-wing film, and I'm not sure that High Noon is actually a left-wing allegory of the McCarthy era either, but when it's often mentioned together that, and John Wayne didn't really cover himself in glory. We those of us of a certain age think of him in the Green Berets and being kind of a jerk about Vietnam, but he was even more of a jerk about the McCarthy period and was kind of unpleasant to people. So yeah, I mean I love John Wayne, don't get me wrong, but he didn't.
Yeah, but maybe in this particular instance, it was just that Hawks. I mean, in his biographies, he just didn't like the idea that the sheriff would be cowardly, would not take responsibility for his job, being professionalism,
right?
Such as Stallworth.
Right. These guys are all living by a code. I mean, they're prosecuting the guy for this random murder, and they're all risking their lives to deliver justice, even though they don't really have some of them, like Colorado, don't really have a dog in the hunt, so.
There is something about the rhythm that the film, you mentioned some of the great Hawks film before in earlier times, and they're all real fast, and the dialogue overlaps. I mean, there are different eras of filmmaking, but this one is just a film that you don't want to leave. It's a very long movie, and you don't feel it so because you want to spend time with these people.
Yeah, it's 2 hours and 40 minutes.
Yeah, it's really long.
Movie.
Yeah.
It zips right along.
Yeah, and was Dean Martin the first choice that how did Martin, because that's a brilliant casting, obviously.
Yeah, I don't know if he was the first choice, but he was a great choice. He's a very underrated actor. I just saw Kiss Me Stupid, where he plays himself, and it's some real depth to play yourself as such an unattractive character, you know. So.
Yeah, and there is something in with the music and the songs. It's just sort of the way he inserts these foreign elements to the.
And the fact that it's, I mean, even though it's dubbed over, it's still, you don't have like strings and mariachi and all the stuff. You have the diguello music, which was actually copied, the Dmitri Tiomkin score when Sergio Leone shot Once Upon a Time in America. He said to Nino Rota, "I want Rio Bravo music on the opening," right? That El Diguello.
It made me very aware of much more Morricone, in a much more heightened and kind of hysteric, neurotic way Morricone used the music and for the Leone films. If you have any question, raise your hand. There's one there.
Go ahead.
Yep.
Oh, we have a mic coming.
This was one of my dad's favorite movies, and I haven't seen it since I was 10 on TV. And the thing that really struck me about it was that it's a relationship movie. You know, they're just not that many for a movie of its length. The guns and the horses are sort of incidental almost. And I was struck by the compassion that John Wayne had for Dean Martin and his drinking problem, and just kind of hanging in there with him. And I've never seen that in a Western before. So that's an observation more than a question.
No, that's a good observation. And you could also say that there's a very the relationship between Feathers and Chance is surprisingly asexual. He's completely befuddled the whole time, and she's in charge without being domineering. There's also, I mean, a faint homoerotic current between Dean Martin and Ricky Nelson that, there's the Hawksian men without women kind of thing. I mean, that's the only... the other, it is a relationship movie because you probably didn't even notice there isn't a single exterior. The whole thing is shot on a set, on a Hollywood set. You never leave town. You only see the mountains when they're driving in the beginning of the, usually Westerns, they kind of lean on the fact that it's outdoors and the horses are beautiful and the big sky and the tumbling tumbleweeds and all that stuff. But we had one tumbleweed. That was it, right?
I just thought that the speaking was so slow and so determined that you would not miss a word. And I don't know if that was supposed to be Western or cowboy, but it is very measured.
I don't think they actually spoke like that in the West. I think in the real West, they spoke more like a Deadwood, if you've seen Deadwood. Although Deadwood is more Shakespearean than the West, but I think the diction was a little more slurred in the Old West than we had in this movie.
Yeah, but they savor the way they speak. Yeah,
Really having a good time.
yeah, they're having a very good time.
It's like the director didn't want you to miss a single joke or nuance or something.
Yeah,
Slow down.
the repartee reminded me a little bit of Rosalind Russell and Cary Grant and His Girl Friday.
Friday, yeah,
Right,
yeah.
Bringing
a baby.
Right.
Yeah. It's true that Cary Grant at some point was supposed to play the Dean Martin.
Well, you know more than I do. That's possible.
Yeah, I think that I believe.
I don't know that he would sing though.
Hold it. Out there, Phil.
You mentioned the intentional reason of putting Ricky Nelson in the movie, the singing sequence with Dean Martin and Ricky Nelson, the fact that they're both singers. Was that like what the writer and director wanted, do you think, or was that a marketing ploy of they're popular singers, let's have them sing a song?
Oh, it's definitely a marketing ploy, but they didn't overdo it. You know, sometimes when you, who was it? Tex Ritter sang High Noon, right? And they actually made a big hit out of that. But most soundtracks in Westerns, when the hero breaks out into a song, it's terrible. But this was actually okay, you know? I mean, that was really their voices. I mean, Dean Martin has a beautiful voice. Ricky Nelson has a beautiful voice. You could see Ricky Nelson flubbed a few lines, so they had to overdub it, but that was his voice.
I think she was right there.
So other than the saloon that was called Rio Bravo, is there any particular significance to the title of the movie?
But it sounds good. It's like last night we saw Sorcerer. That seemed, you know, that kind of brought up The Exorcist, even though it had nothing to do with the movie. So here, there probably is a Rio Bravo somewhere in Texas, and you know, what's the next one was El Dorado, and then Rio Lobo, and you know.
Lana?
How would you compare Rio Bravo with Red River?
Well, I think it's a more successful movie. I mean, I think Red River is another great classic, but I think that you said it's a relationship movie. I think that's really a good way of characterizing it. I think the whole sort of edible struggle in Red River is never really resolved. I mean, Monty Clift is a leaky actor in a way that Dean Martin is not. You know, Dean Martin's character was quite well drawn, and Montgomery Clift's more of a method actor with stuff going on all over the place. And, you know, John Wayne was almost 10 years younger in Red River, so he was a bigger stud. But, you know, here he had more of a world weariness along with his studliness, whereas in Red River he's just like a fascist, you know. So
Yeah, question. This is your third annual. What is the organization? I'm sorry. What's the organization that is undertaking this preservation? Is it, you know, a small group in a dark room, whatever? And how many of these do you? How many do you know? Maybe it's just Martin Scorsese and his friends, but how many are you churning out a year? Because this is the third year you've been here.
Yes, but this is okay. We have been here. You know, we're with the cinema. I'm the artistic director of the cinema, so I choose the films. You know, and the films are chosen among films that are restored or not restored sometime by different organizations. You know, this one in particular, as the gentleman that introduced at the beginning said, it was a Warner Brothers restoration. So the studio undertook, and with Martin Scorsese and Steven Spielberg's personal supervision, I believe, they undertook this one. You know, but yesterday morning we had some Walt Disney shorts that were, you know, classic symphonies of the 30s, and that's a Disney project. And so the actual doing of the restorations and preservation is done by different organizations, and then we show them. I get to choose them and show them. And the reason why I wanted from the very beginning to have a weekend like this, I mean, we show a lot of repertory films, but to have a weekend is just for us to concentrate on you know, on the memory of film and keeping it alive.
And there's momentum behind this in that the various studios are committed to once a year, twice a year, pumping out these, quote, restored films.
well, I think in this case they expect to make money over the long haul from having done this. Other restorations are done as philanthropic gestures.
Yeah, I think that there is, you know, there is momentum for some big titles. This is a very, very famous film that is beloved by major directors. You know, just as I said, Spielberg and Scorsese, you know, co-signed this restoration, and there are other things that are more obscure, and it's getting harder and harder. Some of, you know, my friends and archivists that in here can say, Dave from MoMA or Kevin from, you know, from Disney, it's harder to get financing for films, for titles that have no commercial profit. So it's important that cinemas like us, you know, show them, and that the audience demands for them to be restored.